Have you ever listened to someone speak who uses language that sounds wise, yet you wonder if it's more of a status performance than an act based on delivering truth? Their choice of words seems suitable for the situation. They sound professional. They dress professionally. And in the situation, they have authority. Maybe they are a professor giving a public interview on a topic. Or maybe they are the leadership of an orchestra, giving a speech about their past successes and upcoming tours, presenting their own activities in an admirable light. They speak correctly and people applaud them. Yet you feel like there is something else going on. There is performance in their voice, and for some reason you worry that people trust them blindly. At the same time, you doubt your own discomfort too. You cannot be sure whether there is an emperor's new clothes situation going on, where you see that something substantial is missing, while everyone else is applauding. The speaker holds certain professional power in the situation, and their role or status makes people believe what they are saying. The discomfort that you might experience goes back to questions of wisdom or competence versus power and the ambiguity in this relationship. Wisdom and power are usually juxtaposed in the Western culture as follows. Wisdom, good. Power, bad. That's clearly an angry face. Universities, for example, are expected to strive for wisdom, knowledge, and transparency. Research is published, and then it is criticized by other researchers. In this juxtaposition, wisdom is expected to win. What I find more interesting than this juxtaposition between wisdom and power is the question, can wisdom at all exist without any power? Is it even heard? And now power is understood in a much wider sense than, for example, physical force. Power as status, formal power, power of the use of professional vocabulary, power of rhetoric, power of professional titles and education, which is often accepted as a positive form of authority. You would not want anyone else than a neurosurgeon perform a surgery on your brain. But when does wisdom become performative? And even more importantly, how can you become a detector of that performativity? Let us call it professional bullshitting. That's the topic of this video. My name is Rebecca. I have also made a handout of this video content that you can access from the link down below. I recently returned from my travels in Sicily, where Syracuse was the final city I visited. Syracuse is old, historical, and famous for many things, among others the fact that Plato visited the city several times, trying to present the idea of a wise philosophical king as the leadership. He almost got killed and also almost got sold to slavery on different trips. So that didn't go very well. And you could say that wisdom was overpowered by, well, power. Here is Syracuse, the ruins of Apollo. It is a city with at least 2,700 years of history, lots of monuments and ancient ruins, and incredible restaurants. Let's first talk a little bit about Socrates and Plato. Socrates believed that wisdom should guide society. In the end, Socrates was executed for sharing thoughts perceived as dangerous, especially for the youth, that could make them criticize the leadership. You know about the famous speech of Socrates in the end. He does not compromise his principles in the face of power and death. Socrates also warns his accusers that in the attempt to silence him, they have only harmed themselves, and that new, even harsher critics will soon arise. So, Socrates being executed and Plato almost being killed in the face of power against wisdom. This illustrates the juxtaposition in Western history. Wisdom or competence is considered good, and power, when applied without wisdom, well, it wins in a way in this situation, but it is in general considered bad. I think that this juxtaposition is often oversimplified, and the complexity of that question, the question of when competence becomes performative, driven by power, was also present in antiquity in terms of the study of rhetoric, logos, ethos, and pathos, the elements that affect the perceived reliability of a speech. In his speech, and in general, Socrates distances himself from the clever and deceitful rhetoric of his accusers. He skillfully employs logos, ethos, and pathos to justify his mission and reveals the jury's moral failing. Socrates establishes his ethos, his credibility as a speaker, by portraying himself as a humble servant of the truth. He rejects the polished and manipulative style of his accusers and builds credibility as an honest man. Logos is, however, Socrates' main rhetoric tool. Argumentation and logic, the content of what he says. He uses, in general, dialectic questioning to expose the internal contradictions of what the other person is saying. He does not use pathos at all by trying to affect feelings in a traditional way, but more subtly. In this speech, by letting the jury know that he pities them, because by convicting him, they themselves are committing injustice. The dialogues of Socrates, written by Plato, have many dimensions because they both warn against rhetoric when used against truth, and they subtly use rhetoric. They are on both sides in a way, and they sometimes demonstrate things through irony too. So all these complexities were present by that time. And when you think about someone with status authority in a situation today, it could be a guru on YouTube, and maybe you like a lot of what they are saying, yet you worry also that they use their role as a public face and their rhetoric skills to bullshit us. When you're having these considerations, you are dealing with the same fine line as these questions from antiquity. So, about the main topic, how to spot professional bullshitting or manipulation dressed as professionalism. This area is very subtle. Not all dramaturgy is bad. Not all intellectual vocabulary is bad either. Perhaps only when it becomes a performative demonstration of certain power. And not all power is bad either. Even presenting content with good dramaturgy, making it understandable, could be considered a form of rhetoric power. Let's have a look at these sculptures of Plato and Socrates again. They have certain visual rhetoric power. They seem to communicate something like ancient wisdom, which can signal some levels of nostalgia in Western culture. The oldness itself might give them certain authority. Whether the distance in time as such gives truth validity or universality is up for discussion. When knowingly appealing to our nostalgic emotions by showing sculptures from antiquity, I would say that we are slightly in the territory of bullshitting. It is interesting, by the way, that we can feel nostalgic about antiquity at all, since none of us lived by then. In some videos on social media, Stoicism, for example, the ancient philosophy that teaches things such as virtue, rationality, resilience, and controlling only what you can control, has found a modern, more capitalized form. And it almost seems like Stoicism is about how to gain power and dominance over others by staying calm in some of these videos. Maybe you've seen them. And some channels, while they talk about this wisdom, they show images of old sculptures, often of muscular and hyper-masculine looking men. To what extent is this, as a form of visual rhetoric, a territory of bullshitting? They would probably argue that the link between Stoicism and these sculptures is that their fitness is a reminder of inner discipline or something, and that sounds reasonable. But I think many of the images of these sculptures are actually AI created. While the society by the time was patriarchal, Stoicism itself, its ethics, says that the universe is organized by divine reason, logos, and all human beings contain a spark of this reason. Stoics explicitly argue that women and men possess the same capacity for virtue, wisdom, and logic. So, Stoicism itself is not a hypermasculine belief system. And let's talk about the whiteness of the sculptures. We might associate them with something pure and virtuous. They seem to indicate universal truth. Yet this is deceitful. The statues by the time were not white at all. Most of them were painted with bright colors, and they may even have looked more like Ronald McDonald. So, there is certain romanticized aesthetics about the content, which gives it performative power. Another example where some levels of bullshitting is involved could be the ways in which the media sometimes discusses classical music and the heroes of classical music. An image of a conductor or star performer in a concert review who seems to really feel a lot on the stage. Maybe they are directing or performing on an instrument. This reinforces certain ideas about music and about classical music or art music. Perhaps that music is the language of emotions, a very specific Western view about music which is not very old. It also supports the idea that music is self-expression, an individualistic framework, which is also pretty young historically, at least in the modern sense. My point is not to criticize the conductor or musician, but that this way of framing music is rhetoric, and that it is already deeply present in our culture. It also supports the activity of hero making or genius making, which is also part of a modern Western framework. Instead of focusing on the performance or the event, the interaction in the space between all the actors, the focus might be on their talents, a masterfully led performance. A conductor is sometimes presented as someone who manages to interpret these romantic works with such engagement, someone who really feels very deeply. So the point is that this carries a specific type of rhetoric power. The music world seems to be filled with this kind of performed competence or competence framed in this particular way. Individual musicians step into roles that society has already romanticized, and those who benefit from these ideas are perhaps the least ones to question them. Taava Koskinen has written an excellent book about the culture of genius making, though not just in music, but it is only published in Finnish. Since Romanticism, genius has been defined as an innate quality of a person, so this is the modern way of understanding genius. Someone creating something completely new because of their innate quality of genius. Kirjoituksia neroudesta. I hope it will be translated one day. And maybe you feel the same about your fields, your professions. I'm genuinely curious. Please drop a comment down below and share your experiences with how competence is framed and what you consider bullshitting. And remember, the bullshitting is not necessarily in the content, but in a cultural framing. Now to the process of detecting professional bullshitting and also how to navigate this fine line. I'm going to share 3 tools with you. First, always keep the question in mind, who does it benefit to present this fact in a particular way? It helps you stay aware and to register patterns. A lot of the public rhetoric is already part of society's ideas. Someone just implements them because there's some kind of benefit in it. A further question could be, who does it benefit not to question this existing idea? Because these ideas are often already part of culture and part of language. And when you operate in language, you're trying to choose words that match your message. You might criticize or define words along the way as you speak. So if you are reflective, you negotiate with the meanings of language as you speak. You're not just repeating cliches, but you are navigating in language. So, who does it benefit not to question an existing idea? They are quietly supporting an existing rhetoric that might be problematic from some perspectives. Yet the words themselves, they seem innocent. This strategy, asking who certain use of words benefits, it does not mean the same as always assuming some impure intention, or that people are stupid while you yourself are critical and intelligent and above all of it. Not at all. People usually operate from a whole complexity of motives, and they have many simultaneous feelings and conceptions. But this is a way of becoming more observant of when the profession turns into a performance that serves on authority that someone themselves didn't really earn. Second, accept that there is always a process of change over time with words and concepts. There is no pure position that is everlasting, and if you are a truth seeker or bullshit detector, you need to play with this fact a little bit, and you need to be observant of it. Even valid protests might turn into slogans, and they are referred to as movements in simplified ways over time. This is often considered negative, and some even stay away from any public discussion at all because they observe these complexities and they don't want to be misinterpreted. But the changing of meanings, the changing rhetoric around concepts might be unavoidable, and it might not be bad as such. Not acknowledging the changes can be bad. Let's talk about an example from music, the canonic repertoire of classical music, a kind of standard repertoire. This was largely constructed in the latter part of the 19th century. In that time, a standard repertoire was formed that the symphony orchestras and operas performed internationally. The musical work, as a thing, gained new status, as something solid and permanent, something timeless. This as opposed to being seasonal, created for specific occasions, or something that was constantly revised for new purposes. So, musical works turned into what we today call historical pearls. And this repertoire was partly constructed in retrospect, and many works from the time before the canonization were selectively included. Yet today we naively talk about masterpieces that have lasted over time due to their genius inner structure. Yet the whole idea of a musical work itself, in the modern sense, is an invention or result of a certain epoch. I like to refer to the historical pearls as actually ahistorical pearls, because the historical context and the difference of that context is not necessarily acknowledged or communicated to the audience. The different conditions at different times and how listening has changed. We do not listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony with the same ears as when it was first performed. Now we have heard it in movies and TV commercials, and listening in general has changed too. So the way this canonized music is presented to an audience does not always acknowledge how perception has changed and how the idea of what a composer is and what music is has changed too. A completely other example of rhetoric power, let's talk about the band Spice Girls from the 90s and early 2000, and their way of branding girl power. It was a brand from the beginning and had the commercial aspect from the beginning. There has also been debates later about whether it was a false promise of some kind of sparkling freedom to girls by the time that some people capitalized on. But it also had a lot of positive energy by the time, and you could also explore why such a concept had such deep effect in that particular era. I don't think that any brand can merely be reduced to something that was sold to the aimless and stupid consumers. There's a little bit more complexity to these processes. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. So tell me what you want, what you really, really want. I wanna really, really, really wanna zig a zig. And if you watch until the end of this video, you will hear the end of that phrase. So, we have brands such as Spice Girls' Girl Power, which had certain rhetoric power, and the phenomenon had some complexity to it. We also have composers like Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who have also been turned into products in the genius-making culture. The Mozart we know today is largely a construction from the Romantic era, after his time. And he has been constructed to the extent that he has been packaged as Mozartkugeln. This aspect of concepts, that they change and that their meanings change, is not inherently negative. You cannot completely guard the truth against how it is framed in the future. What you can do is participate in this process with awareness. Knowing this makes you much more observant and playful with words. You understand the often many layers of meanings that words have. You understand that something might be a cliché. You are able to detect fake pompousness, and you can respond to it properly. You can use irony. You can change your voice when you say a word. Having that sensitivity to words can make you a good writer or public speaker and a good thinker. And you can have influence if you want to. You can bring your doubt, the experience of uncertainty, into your text and any other presentation. That doesn't reduce your reliability on a topic. Rather, it makes what you have to say more precise. And people often connect with that experience, the need to expose, but also the uncertainty. They connect with your truth-teller vibe because it often feels genuine to them. In these ways, you can use your sensitivity toward performative wisdom and your ability to be a bullshit detector to actually reveal, to discuss, and to expose. Number 3, create your own concepts. This can be efficient without being bullshitting if it is not intended to polarize truth without evidence and when it is not directly argumentative. You can reveal things with your way of developing new concepts. An example from my own writing is the concept the infantile turn, which I started to use to indicate a change in music history when certain cultural changes happened in art music. I published an essay about the symphony orchestra as an infantile institution, and there was a chapter called The Infantile Turn. It has caught on to some extent, and I think it is because I am not the inventor of this phenomenon itself, but only naming it in an efficient way. Musicologists have written about cultural changes in music during that time for decades. In addition, many of those who work with music professionally could recognize the patterns that I referred to, so the focus is really on institutionalized behavior, how the structures may enable it. So, to make a little bit of noise in the public space by naming things in a way that people notice might be a way of participating rhetorically, responding to already existing bullshitting in terms of power language and roles that often go unquestioned. I do feel slightly dichotomous about this because I think it is sad if you have to respond to certain things by making even more noise. But I also believe that there is not really any space outside of rhetoric. And that if you want to make sense to other people, you have to consider the context, the medium, the way of responding, and you are always navigating in a field of power. You might as well turn it into your playground. Thank you for watching. I really wanna zig a zig. So easy, got it, that's easy, that you're gonna get the feed, da 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 da, family, da 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 da, easy feed, da da da, pieces it done, that this is a real lady, da 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 da. Slam your body down and wind it all around. Slam your body down and wind it all around.
Slam your body down and wind it all around. Slam your body down and wind it all around. Slam your body down and wind it all around. Slam your body down and wind it all around. Slam your body down and wind it all around.